OWS fam, Sharp Football Analysis Nation. Welcome back to Searching for Ceiling, the final episode of Searching for Ceiling for the 2023 season. We are well into 2024. We are here to bring you the heat, same as always. As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new here, we might have something in the works for next year as well. So stick around for Searching for Ceiling, presented by 1 Week Season and Sharp Football Analysis.
1 week season.
Mr. Rich Hribar, week 18, brother. We are here. We made it. It is bittersweet. How are we doing this week, man?
Oh man, yeah, week 18 is it is, like you said, bittersweet is a great word for it, not just because it's the end of the season. We have only finite amount of football games left, but it was a pleasure doing this show with you. You and I had never interacted online. JM approached us about doing a show together. We're like, sure, why not? And we put it together, and I've genuinely enjoyed doing the show. And I feel like a lot of people have enjoyed, listening to us on Friday afternoons for whatever incoherent ramblings we have spun out here.
Yes, that is the operative word, most likely, is incoherent. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, as always, dude, I've had a blast. But without further ado, we're going to skip the macro view of the slate. We're going to jump right in and start talking nuts and bolts. I have a feeling that listeners are going to get this team doesn't have anything to play for. Right. This team does. They're going to get all that elsewhere. So we are going to jump right in. And I want to just leave this completely open and throw it over to you. And I want to hear some nuggets about some spots that you're interested in attacking this week.
Yeah, I mean, this is from a slate perspective, tough for me because my favorite type of games are, small field. I like the onslaught games, try to get the game stack right. If I get the game stack right, then the field has to catch up with me. And this particular slate does not present a lot of opportunities like in weeks past where there are these games that have not only two teams that maybe are necessarily going to go full throttle, but also possess the actual weaponry that I want to onslaught the game with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one game, I guess we'll start with the one game that does stand out to me from that perspective, just because it's my favorite game of the week for lineup building. And I think you can cross correlate it both ways pretty effectively. And that's Seattle, Arizona. Okay. We obviously know, again, Seattle is playing for their playoff lives. Arizona's given us no indication they are not out here trying. These dudes were down here 21-6 at the half in Philadelphia last week, could have easily curled up and died, and came all the way back, fought back, and won. New coaching staff, new regime, they're trying to institute something. I don't think they're going to lay down and die here at home against the Seattle defense that, oh boy, there was a point midway through the season I was like, man, Seattle's defense is low-key underrated. Reek Woolen is out here playing well. And Devin Witherspoon, what a pick he's been. He still is playing well. They add Leonard Williams. I'm like, man, they are really putting this thing together. And, dude, this defense has just fallen apart the last month and a half. They got absolutely curb stomped by Mason Rudolph and the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. They haven't stopped the run for 6 weeks. Mason Rudolph completes 75% of his passes, 11.5 yards per pass attempt. They're coming off Kyler Murray's best game. Inversely, I don't want to just eat up all the shot clock in there because I do think that Geno Smith's in a good spot too. But this game, like I said, just you can play it both ways. You can do Geno stacks with James Conner. You can do some Kyler stuff with Kenneth Walker coming back. This game, from the way I typically like to play fantasy football, is the one game that draws out to me because there's a lot of ways I can throw lineups around this.
Yeah. One of the most interesting aspects of this game that the field probably won't get to is playing both running backs, which I think is viable here. You've got two sub 7K running backs and two defenses that have largely been unable to stop the run. So if we're talking about a game environment erupting, that's more opportunities for two offenses that have proven to want to run the football in the green zone to score touchdowns. So I think this is one of the more underrated aspects. Are you at all interested in Arizona pass catchers?
Obviously, the way this slate is playing out at the tight end position, I think by default, at least in some tournament perspective, you have to at least entertain Trey McBride. Now, the larger field size you go, it's easier to fade him because we're not going to have probably George Kittle. We're not going to have David Njoku. We're not going to have Travis Kelce. We don't know if we'll get a full game out of Dallas Goedert, even though I don't think anyone's scared of Dallas Goedert at this point anyways. So we're really down to just kind of, the Sam Laporta play the whole game for Detroit. He's been kind of banged up. Evan Ingram doesn't have a great matchup, but we know that he can draw targets. And Jake Ferguson, that's really all we need to fail outside of McBride. So paying down at tight end definitely looks pretty optimal, but Trey McBride and smaller field stuff definitely fits. And listen, we say it every week. Listen, Greg Dortch is just a baller. We don't know what we're going to get. We could get a zero. We could get a zero out of Greg Dortch. We could. But anytime this guy plays and they actually put him on the field as part of the offense, the dude makes plays. The guy just makes plays. So I think those would be the two guys, but obviously Connor is, I think, the crown jewel of the Arizona side. I mean, it's just this guy's been good all year. Also, Drew Petzing's been good all year. This run game has been good all year. It's the one thing consistent about Arizona is they have been a well-designed run team. They've run it well on a lot of good opponents too. So now you're facing a team, like I said, over the past 6 weeks, Seattle's 31st in the NFL in yards per carry to running backs. Guys like this, both Steelers running backs are RB1s this week. Guys like Tony Pollard were RB1s against them. So James Conner definitely looks like he's ready to finish it strong. But I do think Dortch and McBride are kind of the fun pieces.
I like how we can talk about Tony Pollard like you did, guys like Tony Pollard, that bum over there in Dallas.
I mean, listen, no one wore it worse than me. I was in on him in the offseason, and it did not go well.
I feel like sharps across the board kind of where I was as well. We digress a little bit. One of the more interesting games to me is this Falcons and Saints game. And I think it becomes more interesting if Alvin Kamara misses. He is coming off an ankle injury. I did not see where is it high ankle, is it low ankle? I did not see what his injury was, but he left at the end of the first half last week, did not come back into the game. And we have Kendre Miller, who has basically been limited for the last 3 weeks, has not played in 7 weeks, could be stepping into kind of this change of pace role behind Jamal Williams. We have Taysom Hill, who could soak up some additional backfield usage, whether under center or lined up tight end and backfield. It doesn't really matter for him. And then you have this very clear Atlanta defense that they play a ton of zone. They're blitzing at about league average rates. They're generating pressure at above average rates, but they're really, the way that they are built is emphasized in the middle of the field. They're a defense that is built from their linebackers and their safeties, and that has led to them allowing the 4th deepest ADOT of any team this year. So you talk about that with Chris Olave, with Rashid Shaheed, with Juwan Johnson. Now, the hardest part about this game is who's it going to be? Because Pete Carmichael is a guy, for everything that he isn't, he at least is very good at designing an offense to exploit the tendencies of the defense he's playing, and folds into that the ability to maximize kind of the talent that he does have at his disposal. We saw last week that kind of manifested through Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson was seeing extreme volume from a targets per route run rate standpoint prior to Alvin Kamara departing. And then they were up 20-0 at half, and they didn't really need to pass the ball after that. But this Saints team is kind of interesting to me. Do you see any spots to attack here?
I mean, this is one of those games we know is going to be competitive, kind of throughout. It just depends. Does it end up being kind of like an Arthur Smith, Dennis Allen slog, or do we kind of get, some upside here? I think there's definitely some individual pieces here that are definitely appealing. We saw Bijan Robinson have one of his better games of the year against the Saints early in the season. So he's definitely someone that's interesting. And obviously people probably aren't going to get to him on this slate and are pretty done with him playing or chasing the ghost of kind of Bijan Robinson. But he did cook the Saints, and they've been a bad run. And up until last week, they had not played the run well over the past month. But they did, kind of rise up in Tampa Bay. That was such a weird spot. I don't think Kamara is going to play. The injury looked bad itself. I saw a lot of speculation that it was a high ankle. He hasn't practiced yet. Remember, we were in this spot week one. These teams played, or not in week one. These teams didn't play. It was Carolina, Atlanta. But we were in the spot with week one where Alvin Kamara was out, and we tried to chase Jamal Williams a little bit. And even going back to last year, if this guy doesn't score a touchdown, I mean, he needs multiple touchdowns probably in DFS, and he's not priced down either. The thing is, it's not like he's 4K, and you're going to play him. So he's kind of a tough play for me. What's interesting about Taysom Hill is I just don't know how healthy he is. Like in a game last week where Alvin Kamara leaves in the first half, they're up 20-0. You figured we would have saw some more Taysom Hill in the run game, but he's not getting touches in the run game now for about the past 3 weeks. He's missed a ton of practice time. I really wonder just how healthy he is at this point and how much workload he can take on. I feel like he's not going to be as involved in the run game as people are maybe hoping for. His price tag, it is wide open at tight end, like I said. But also Juwan Johnson, it might feel point chasey, but there is a lot of objective stuff in his favor where it's not necessarily, as point chasey as it sounds. Last week, he had a 35% target share. He's not going to run that back, but his previous season high in target share came against these Atlanta Falcons in week 12 when he had 7 targets. And that's something that we've seen throughout the course of the season. I mean, opposing teams have targeted their tight ends 27% of the time against Atlanta. It's the second highest rate in the league. So I know it feels like you're chasing a little bit of what Juwan Johnson did last week, but I do think at his price tag in the context of the slate, he does kind of fit a lot. And then we saw Olave had 100 yards on these guys in the first half the last time they played before things got kind of dialed down. I've chased a lot of spike weeks for Chris Olave the wrong weeks. So, I mean, what's another week of going down a rabbit hole?
Shameless, man. I will be there as well. Something that stood out to me when breaking down this game is Kyle Pitts, man. And it feels so like wrong and gross, but like Kyle Pitts is top 5 in air yards. He's top 5 in targets per route run. He's top 8 in route participation rate at tight end. So like this is a guy that is involved in this offense still, and they might not pass a lot, but what's interesting to me is playing Kyle Pitts, pairing him with someone like Chris Olave, with Rashid Shaheed, with Juwan Johnson. Double tight end. Hilow just said, do double tight end, run away. That is what is probably the most interesting piece of this game to me. If it develops, and we have to kind of view this game and break it down to what it is and what it isn't. It carries an extremely wide range of outcomes. Why? Because Arthur Smith, if we've talked about like the 3 phases of an NFL football game, it's like your game plan in the first maybe quarter and a half. Your adjustments you make after that is game management, like after the one and a half quarters to like the end of the third quarter. And then after that, it's like you're in the oh shit realm. Well, Arthur Smith just leaves out one of those steps. He has a 2-step game plan. It is 3/4 of my game plan, what I'm going to do, and then we'll see where we're at and if we need to even include the oh shit phase. So that like adds to the downside in this spot. Obviously, you said Dennis Allen. You mentioned Dennis Allen on the other side. But the fact that we have the desperation factor does bring some upside to this game. And it would manifest, I think, in the form of a game or because of a game that is more back and forth, as opposed to one of these teams jumping out to an early lead. Because as we've seen, Dennis Allen is completely fine just turning to the run with Jamal Williams for the entirety of the second half in a bad matchup like he did last week with against Tampa Bay. So that at least gives me a little bit of intrigue with something like probably Chris Olave plus Kyle Pitts. We also have a guy in Mr. Drake London, who is the only pass catcher on the Atlanta Falcons that is on the field in a near every down role. Like even Kyle Pitts is typically hovering between 60 to 80% snap rate. Bijan Robinson, same thing, hovering between 60, 80% snap rate. Drake London is a guy that if the Falcons are playing from behind, could have a clear path. He's probably the likeliest player on this team to approach or surpass double digits. He's done it a couple times this season. The only time I have played Drake London all season was this game here against Washington when he had 12 targets, because it was another spot where we expected this team to have to pass a little bit more. This could be one of those spots. So Drake London at only 5K is at least somewhat interesting to me. And I caveat that with you must play like a member of the Saints if playing Drake London, because you are saying that they are scoring touchdowns. They are playing Drake London is saying that the Falcons are behind in the second half. That's basically what it amounts to. So any interest in London, Pitts, any of that nonsense?
I played London twice this year, and he's had 2 top 5 weeks.
Yes.
The Buccaneers and the Commanders games, the only games I played him. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 4. We don't know who's playing quarterback yet. We're seeing if Taylor Heineke's going to try to play.
Yeah.
I'm largely at the point with the Falcons guys. Like, I can see the angle for Bijan Robinson. Like, I don't know if he's going to make my core. There's so many good running backs this week. That's the other interesting thing about this slate is, like, it's different than a previous week 18 years where it is wide open, but like there are a lot of clear like guys that we can fit in without any salary restrictions this year that we know are proven commodities where we don't have to chase like all these bottom rung punt plays that I know a lot of people are excited about playing, the Jordan Masons of the world or Pierre Strongs or Richie James or Chris Conley or whatever Jamoke you want to punt down for. But I don't think it's necessary on this slate. But I'm also like, I think if the Falcons are going to shadow realm me, I'll let them. Like, I don't like they haven't shown like the upside on individual player basis where like I am like necessarily like I'm going to do a gotcha. You know what I mean? I'm going to let someone else try to pull a gotcha on me, I think, this week.
Cool. I dig it, man. So let's just ping pong it back, man. Throw me a game that you want to discuss real quick.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like that Cardinals Seahawks game was like the only objective, like great like game spot. I think there's other like intriguing spots. Like, I mean, I don't know what Dan Campbell is gonna do. I think we could take him at his word. I think he's earned it at this point. He isn't really a guy that gives us a bunch of BS coach speak. But also, why would he play all his guys? Like, it doesn't make any damn sense. Like, we saw what happened to Brandon Staley last year when he tried to play his starters, and Mike Williams, ends up getting injured and can't play in the postseason. The margin for the Lions to oscillate from the 3 seed to the 2 seed is so thin. I don't see the importance, but if they're going to go out here and push guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown against the Vikings and give us pushback to where we could have, this Justin Jefferson run back, I don't really know how I'm going to play the Lions side, but I know I'm going to play through Justin Jefferson for sure. Yeah. He's not hard to get to. I feel like the field definitely wants to play CeeDee Lamb. And I think the Cowboys are an intriguing dynamic on the slate in general, because obviously if the Cowboys starters get pulled in this game, it's because the Cowboys starters did some stuff. Yeah. They put up points, but also which Cowboy did the things. And, was it spread out? Was it a team effort? Was it just a CeeDee Lamb? Because when these teams played on Thanksgiving, the Commanders and Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb had a very mild game. He had a touchdown, 50 yards, though. He had a 2-point conversion to kind of smooth some things out. But he's the most expensive receiver on both sites. I know a lot of people are going to jam him in because he's not hard to jam in. But Justin Jefferson below him, I believe, has a more clear path to overall game targets and potentially a better game environment. Because, one, the Lions secondary is bad when it's at 100%. And if they are going to swap any guys out or give anyone any alleviation at any point during that game, it just gives him full thrust more to have a higher game. So, I mean, I outright disbelieve Justin Jefferson's a better play than CeeDee Lamb this weekend.
Okay. I'd get behind that. I agree. Like, the Lions are super hard. And some of these other teams are super hard to get a grasp on because we don't know, like, what we don't know. And to pretend that, like, there's this any level of certainty this week is, I think, silly, childish, whatever you want to call it. But that said, in those spots that are expected to garner lower ownership, that's when you take those gambles on the uncertainty. I have not looked at ownership yet, but I can't imagine that the Lions are going
to. Is it even useful to look at ownership on the slate? Like, let me ask you, outside of like the obvious stuff, like, it's going to be wide open. Like, it's going to be largely open.
We're probably going to see some of the higher owned plays on the slate be some of these value guys that are known to be starting. Like we know that CMC is out. You mentioned Jordan Mason. We know that some of these other teams like the Cleveland Browns are going to be resting starters. All that's been declared out of Cleveland is that Joe Flacco isn't starting. Is that accurate? Like, we haven't seen Amari Cooper say no. We haven't seen David Njoku say no. But like, breaking down that situation, it's like, why would you play Jerome Ford, Kareem Hunt, who has been on the injury report for the last 7-8 weeks? Why would you play Amari Cooper, who has been like not practicing until a limited session Friday because of his heel and then gutting through it and then miss the game? Why would you play David Njoku, who is such a large part of this offense right now? Like, we can kind of read between the lines in a little bit of situations, but a lot of these spots are going to be rather wide open or filled with uncertainty. And we've said this before, and we'll continue saying it, like the time to take shots on uncertainty with upside is when they're not owned. So
Right.
are we expecting ownership on Detroit this week?
I don't think so. I would think that they're not going to be, because people aren't going to know what to do.
Yeah.
Like, right. Like, and they play early. They play in the early slate. So I would imagine we don't see a lot of ownership. I just think people are just going to leave it as kind of a hands-off team. And like I said, knowing Dan Campbell, he said that they're going to play, and as long as they play, so I mean, do we mix in Amon-Ra St. Brown with our bringbacks? Do we mix in a Jahmyr Gibbs? Those guys have to be on the table, even outside of just playing Justin Jefferson as a one-off.
I dig it. Another interesting dynamic of the slate that deserves discussion here is the fact that it is almost evenly split between early games and late games. It's a very interesting dynamic because obviously we're going to get half of the information before the slate kicks off, but that also leaves a lot of flexibility in the late portion. What spots are you driven to most from the afternoon games to be able to incorporate that flexibility here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we've got a lot of moving pieces. Obviously, Eagles, Giants is one. We don't really know. Nick Sirianni's been very vague about his plans. He has mentioned that, resting guys is not off the table. I think we have good indication that Devontae Smith's not going to play in this game for sure, given his ankle injury. So they're not, why risk that? So do they do a little bit of scoreboard watching? They keep their eyes on the Dallas score. Does that mean their guys play a quarter? Does it mean they play at all? We don't know, right? Like, that's just another wide open thing. So I definitely will probably make some placeholders with like Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown stacks, and then kind of see if we get 11th hour information, or if we get information prior, we'll excommunicado that. But the Giants side, I think, is what's kind of more interesting about that, though, because they have some of the cheaper pieces that I think we would want to be interested in. Obviously, Tyrod Taylor is on the board again in this spot. We've seen the Eagles; they did it again last week against Kyler Murray. Like, this defense is just not good. They're not even getting sacks anymore, and they're not stopping the run anymore. The front half of the season, they were like a dominant run defense, and they haven't stopped the run since their bye. So we've got Tyrod Taylor in play. I think we have Saquon in play. I think you can go back to Darius Slayton. Those guys are all intriguing kind of options that don't cost a lot outside of Saquon. And then the Eagles side, like I said, I'm going to try to play by ear, but that's another situation like Detroit where we're just not going to have the information. So maybe gamers are just like, I'm not going to deal with it.
Yeah. One thing I want to go back, dude, I forgot, I was fumbling through this over here, is Kyler Murray has had 10 red zone rushing attempts in the past 4 games. He has 0 touchdowns to show for him in that span.
He had 3. I think his first 3 games, I think he had a rushing touchdown in each game, and then
so his last 4 games, he's had 10 red zone rushing opportunities and no touchdowns. So that is at least noteworthy, because we've been talking at OWS, we've been talking for a while about when Kyler is banged up, he does not run as much. It has been proven over the last 3 seasons that when this dude it was a shoulder last year. This year, obviously, coming off of that extended absence. But when he has been banged up, he does not have that escapability mentality. Now we're starting to see a little bit of that come back now that I think he has a few games under his belt. He's feeling his knee a little bit more. And that's a spot. He's priced at 6,400, something like a Kyler Murray skinny, or even a Kyler Murray double, running it with like James Conner and one of Trey McBride or Greg Dortch, I think is highly intriguing in this spot.
I mean, that game just in general, I think both quarterbacks really stand out to me. We talked about the Seattle side and Kyler. Also, Geno Smith, when these teams played in week 7, he completed 75% of his passes. He had 9.1 yards per pass attempt. We've obviously targeted this really passive Arizona defense all year, but he didn't get there because Arizona only scored 10 points. And they had 249 yards of total offense. Now, remember, in that game, they did not have Kyler Murray. They did not have James Conner, and their starting tight end was still Zach Ertz. With Trey McBride, James Conner, and Kyler Murray all on the field together this season, Arizona's averaging 5.6 yards per play, as opposed to 4.2 yards per play with those 3 guys off the field. There's the difference between 8th in the NFL to 31st in the NFL. And I say that because that gives Geno Smith more pushback than they had when these teams played earlier in the season, where Pete Carroll was just allowed to do his Pete Carroll second half. We're just going to hand it off a bunch of times. I do think they get pushed in this game. And we know Arizona doesn't pressure the quarterback. They did only pressure Geno Smith on 35% of his dropbacks when these teams played earlier in the year. That was his fourth lowest rate in a game this season. Geno literally has the widest margin of splits between getting pressured and kept clean. I mean, he's completed 73% of his passes kept clean, 8.4 yards per pass attempts when he hasn't. He has the lowest ADOT in the NFL when he's pressured, and he goes the 10th in the NFL when he's not pressured. So I even think, like I said, you could this game is intriguing. So you could multifacet this. You can build it both ways and give yourself multiple outs based on this game. That's why I think that game, from a cross correlation stance, stands out the most to me objectively of all the games this weekend.
I dig that a good bit. Let's talk real quickly about the Chicago and Green Bay game. The Bears, highly unlikely to just roll over and die, trying to play spoiler against their arch nemesis here in Green Bay. Green Bay, we know, obviously needs a win to secure the 7 seed in the NFC. Is there upside through all those injuries in Green Bay?
I think that's the element you have to sell yourself on because Justin Fields is one of these guys on this slate that is the type of archetype we look for from the quarterback position that has that ability to, if he throws multiple passing touchdowns, he rushes for a touchdown, can threaten for 70 plus rushing yards, possesses the kind of upside to be kind of slate tilting. But I think when you look at the history of this matchup and what Joe Barry, who I believe you probably have questions of his tenure with Green Bay, but he has understood the assignment when it comes to slowing down Justin Fields. So the key to Justin Fields historically in his career has been you do not try to bring extra pass rushers against him. You do not try to play man coverage against them. You drop back. You play a lot of zone. You want him to hold the football. You want him to process the field. And the Packers have only blitzed Justin Fields 23% of the time in their 5 meetings, well below their 30% blitz rate under Joe Barry. When they have blitzed Justin Fields, he's completed 8.8 yards per pass attempt, 2 touchdowns. When they blitzed him on 15 dropbacks all the way back in week 1, Fields was 9 for 11 and 96 yards in that game with his only touchdown. When they haven't blitzed Justin Fields, 6.6 yards per pass attempt, 2 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. You have brought up multiple times on the show the DJ Moore man zone splits, and those tie right into everything we talked about. So I believe if you're counting on the Packers injuries, this would be a larger field tournament stack for me if I'm playing Justin Fields and DJ Moore. And if they're going to be really popular, I'm probably just going to outright leave them alone because historically, Joe Barry has understood the assignment of making them work through this matchup.
Yeah, it's funny that the Packers have the blueprint to slow down Fields, where you look at the Lions and they just they have no idea. It's
Aaron Glenn can't help himself sometimes. Man.
I know, dude. He's itching, man. He's itching over there. So I'm bringing it. I don't care. Anything else in the afternoon that you're kind of?
I will say Aaron Jones in that game is pretty interesting. Obviously, the Bears have a great run D, but the Bears are allowing 15.1 PPR points per game out of the backfield, just pass catches alone, to running backs. Now, Aaron Jones, the last couple weeks, hasn't been really evolved as a passer. You would hope they get religion. Week 1, they had some nice design plays against the Bears, Aaron Jones. So they're allowing 15.1 PPR points per game just out of the backfield through the pass game to running backs. The 31st ranked team is at 11.6. So you're talking about the percentile of increase is absolutely ginormous. So hopefully the Packers know that. I assume if I have this information, someone at the Packers organization has this information. So Aaron Jones becomes interesting with AJ Dillon with that stinger. He's got 20 carries in back-to-back games. I think Aaron Jones is kind of interesting on a site like DraftKings versus FanDuel. I don't think he's hands off on FanDuel, but I think DraftKings becomes particularly interesting.
Yeah, some consider me the Aaron Jones whisperer. I'm very good at identifying when Aaron Jones is going to score multiple touchdowns because there's no variance associated with that. And I'm highly considering Aaron Jones this week as well. We'll just leave it at that. That was dumb. Anyway, we move on. Let's talk about this Buccaneers and Panthers game. We have a very clear shift in offensive tendencies from the Buccaneers of late. Obviously, they were down 20 at half last week. They didn't really get to run the football all that much. But you look at their pass rate over expectation, their pass attempts per game, their compare it to like their rush attempts per game and all the tendencies that kind of go into that, they're a different team over the last 6 weeks compared to the beginning of the season. So against this Panthers defense, and I'll caveat this with saying the Panthers from like an underlying metric standpoint are like run of the mill average run defense. They've just given up 25 freaking touchdowns to the position this season. So take that kind of for what it's worth with a grain of salt. But any interest in like a guy like Rachaad White, any interest in a guy like Mike Evans, who kind of put this team on his shoulders the last time these two teams played?
Yeah, I had been, writing up the Panthers since their bye, and they were a pretty sound run defense since their bye until the past 2 weeks. We saw Aaron Jones 2 weeks ago really gashed them. The Packers had 143 rushing yards, and then last week the Jaguars, the dormant Travis Etienne, they ran for 134. So half of that did come on one run, but they still count. Those yards, that touchdown still counts for fantasy football. They rarely lead. The Panthers, obviously, for being the locked into the number one pick. They face 29 backfield touches per game. So, like, we're getting workload from Rachaad White. So I think that's bankable. And you said touchdown equity. We know he has it. So I definitely believe he's on board. This would be the signal for Mike Evans if they do throw the football. The problem is, like you said, the volume. But, Mike Evans now has played 6 teams this season that are in the top half of the league in rate of cover 3. 5 games against top 10 teams. He's actually faced all 3 of the top 3 teams that rate of cover 3. The Carolina Panthers are number 1 in the NFL. They play cover 3 on 52.4% of passing plays. Against those teams in those 6 games, he had 6 for 66 and a touchdown, 6 for 171 and a touchdown, 5 for 47 and a touchdown, 6 for 70 and 2 touchdowns, 7 for 86 and 2 touchdowns, 7 for 162 and a touchdown. Common theme, touchdown in every game. The 162 was against the Carolina Panthers. So if they are going to throw, there would be some signal that he has been their number 1 target versus these structures of defenses. Obviously, Godwin has thrown a little bit of wrench in things the past month as he started to come on and earn some target shares. He actually didn't even have a catch when these teams played earlier in the year. He was kind of dealing with like a back neck injury, even though he ran a route on 90% of the dropbacks. Which again was more that Mike Evans signal. When they see a lot of cover 3, it's typically going to Mike Evans because he's usually the number 1 read, right, on most of their pass plays. So the ball's going to him. So I think he's in play too. I don't think there's a guy played more this season than Mike Evans. I was going through it, and I think he's been my number 1 most played player in DFS this season. So what's one more week? Why would I turn my back on him now?
The biggest issue, have to throw the caveat, the Panthers are facing the fewest pass attempts per game against this season. So yes, there is that concern. And when you look at, this is, avert your eyes if you're a Panthers fan. This is bad. Like, we look at what Bryce Young has done. Under 200 yards passing in 10 starts this season, multiple touchdowns in 2 games, 11 touchdowns versus 10 interceptions. Like, at what point are we not just like, this franchise is a complete joke? I think we're vastly, and I think the owner's actions last week kind of added to that a little bit. But notwithstanding, I
can't think of a team except for maybe the 0-16 Browns that's had a year as worse as this Carolina, as an organization. When you factor in the trade, because remember too that not only did they brick the Bryce Young pick, and they used all that equity. Remember, they came back in the second round with a top 40 pick and overdrafted Jonathan Mingo, and looks like he's dust. Like he's obviously not playing this game. Maybe he bounces back. I don't want to completely write him off, but he, from all my work, looked like he was a complete reach at that draft equity. And so this is not, but like they even did that. Now you got the owner pouring drinks on people. Like I can't think of an organization that's had a worse season than this. Maybe the 0-16 Browns that year, like, but man,
maybe
with Hugh Jackson, but like everyone knew that they were a joke. But like, it's bad. If you're a Panthers fan, I don't know what you do moving forward. Like,
we're talking about like the Cleveland Browns bags on the face era, where it's like they want to go to the game just because it's NFL football, but they don't want to be seen at the game. Anyway. The fact that the Panthers have faced the fewest pass attempts per game this season is a very clear indicator that they have been playing from behind a whole hell of a lot. What we look for is like, that's not bad by itself. What's bad is your quarterback still having 10 games of under 200 passing yards while that's been happening. So like We can't even bank on, like earlier this season, it was like Adam Thielen's alive. And then it's like, just kidding, guys. He's dust again. We can't bank on like DJ Chark even. I mean, even at least DJ Chark has scored 5 times, but like even DJ Chark, like somebody's got to get him the football. Chuba Hubbard, the matchup is not good against a Tampa Bay team that is top 5 in yards allowed per carry. So it's like, how does the Panthers team keep up? And do we need them to keep up to play someone like Mike Evans? No, we don't. But the margin for error becomes that much smaller.
Right.
Because we could just see, because we've seen how this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team has operated over the last 6 weeks, we could just see them jump into a shell in the second half. So upside is there. Particularly, I'm not playing Chris Godwin at all this week.
No.
I mean, he saved his game last weekend with a 70-something yard touchdown, in garbage time. But like, you want the guys who can do it either from a per touch upside, Mike Evans, or the potential for volume, Rachaad White. And that's kind of where I'm leaving it. I'm not that interested in Baker Mayfield. Do you have any interest in Baker in this spot?
I don't. I know some people, obviously, the motivation. He's got I've seen like the contract incentive crowd get behind because he's going for like 5 different things this weekend. Yeah. But I mean, Baker on this particular site, I just don't think he's needed.
Yeah. Yep. I would concur with that. This Browns and Bengals game, the game environment is not conducive to upside. We'll just leave it that discussion there. That said, because of who is playing in this game, there is the potential for a spark to happen. So, like, to put that a different way, the likeliest scenario in this game is that it plays to this kind of like end of season slugfest. The Browns just trying to make it through healthy. The Bengals, they are broken, beaten, tattered, everything under the sun. T. Higgins, it would make 0 sense for him to play in this game. Likely out. Jamar Chase is still dealing with an AC joint sprain. He played last week, 73% of the offensive snaps. So, like, who can we go to for the expectation of volume and for the potential for upside? My eye is kind of immediately drawn to Harrison Bryant on one side as this athletic type tight end. I was watching this game because I was working it for NBC last weekend. This guy's got a neck, man. Look at that thing. Anyway, I digress. But Harrison Bryant, dude, is a potential for upside if David Njoku's out, if Amari Cooper's out, if Elijah Moore is out, which this would be borderline malpractice if Elijah Moore played this week. Right. There were some independent neurologists last week.
Scary, man. It was scary.
There were some that were saying that was career threatening. Like, he should not play another snap in the NFL. And then he comes back to practice on Wednesday. He's like, yeah, I've got a limited session, bro. I'm good. Anyway, so it would be borderline malpractice if he plays. So now we're talking about like, who are the Browns going to be running out? We're likely to see a bunch of Pierre Strong. We're likely to see a bunch of Harrison Bryant. And I think Harrison Bryant, considering like the dynamics of this slate, is at least interesting. And I think you can bring him back with Jamar Chase if you want to get frisky, because the Browns secondary is also extremely banged up. They have 3 cornerbacks that are currently on the injury report. And if I were to pick who is going to either sit or play a series or 2 and then sit, it would be like Amari Cooper, it would be David Njoku, it would be Jerome Ford, Kareem Hunt, and it would be like the veteran members of this secondary. So there's a lot of uncertainty here. There's a wide range of outcomes, but I think Jamar Chase might be that like pay up type wide receiver that goes overlooked. And again, I haven't looked at ownership, so I don't know. I'm not.
I can imagine he's going to be popular.
Yeah, so I think that is at least interesting to me this week, more so than like saying I want to take a shot on Pierre Strong. And it's because like we know the tendencies of Lou Anarumo's defense. They struggle to defend inline tight ends, and that's just a schematic truth of their defense. So I think Harrison Bryant is very interesting. He has the athletic profile to be the primary pass catcher. He has the height and the size to be a red zone threat. And if you want to just bet on the game environment, you can also throw in Jamar Chase in there.
Yeah, I like Harrison Bryant because I think in the context of you're talking about the positions that punt on with these kind of guys that are playing in like what could be end up being glorified preseason games. Because that's the other thing you have to count on too in these environments. The game environments could also be just bad and not conducive to points like a preseason game. So that's why I think when you look at the way the tight end landscape is positioned this week, that punting at tight end, I don't think it hurts you. If Harrison Bryant bricks, if Davis Allen bricks, if Noah Gray bricks, like I don't think that's really going to hurt you as much as where you say like Pierre Strong or Jordan Mason or Cedric Tillman or Richie James at these other positions. I just think that they aren't needed. I don't see any salary restrictions that in the lineup building I've had no restrictions playing the wide receivers and running backs I want to play. I haven't run it like the actual ones I want to play before getting cute and saying like, all right, well, what if Pierre Strong at 4K does this? What if Richie James at 3K does this? I just don't think they're needed. But at tight end, where we talked about, like it's Trey McBride, it's maybe Sam Laporta, and then it's a huge gap till you get to like Juwan Johnson, and then it's just wide open. It's just literally wide open. So like if those guys suck, I don't think it matters as much. But if you play Pierre Strong at his ownership or Jordan Mason at his projected ownership, like, and he has 15 carries for 47 yards, like Godspeed that you did that in large field. like good luck.
I have a question for you. What is the expected ownership on this man?
Harrison Bryant?
On Christian Kirk.
Oh, well, if he's active, he will be, I imagine, at least 40% in every cash game lineup, 40% probably large field, probably 60, 70% in smaller field stuff. One of the highest guys we've seen of the season, probably. It really irks me that sites do this. Like if they just leave him at 5K and 6K, and if he's out, no one plays him, right? No one plays him. But lowering his price for no damn reason to the stone min on both sites. He's 4K on FanDuel, 3K on DraftKings. Now, if you leave this open for like this backdoor situation. I will say this though. I'm way more interested in playing Calvin Ridley than I am.
I was going to say, knowing all that, do we just click this button? Is that
100% want to play Calvin Ridley? I wanted to play Calvin Ridley before any of this. So when I see that, like, Christian Kirk min price coming off of his groin was literally detached from his body, and he's going to come back and play 5 weeks later. We have these spots where we don't know if we're going to get these defenses again, right? Defensive variance year over year is just so dramatic. We talked about the Cardinals, right? Like we only have one more game to play against this 2023 Cardinals defense. We only have one more game to play against this 23 Commanders defense. We only have one more game to keep attacking this Titans defense. They've literally been a team we have targeted for wide receiver one play, alpha X wide receiver play, boundary wide receiver play the entire damn season. Wide receivers have scored 66% of the points allowed by the Titans is the highest rate in the NFL. They're 29th in points per game allowed to opposing wide receiver ones. They are dead last in the NFL in receptions and yards per game allowed to perimeter wide receivers. Oh, by the way, if you want a box score hunt, Calvin Ridley had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns when they played earlier in the season. And you talk about high cholesterol target equity. Calvin Ridley comes with high variance, but he comes with that tournament type of ceiling upside. 41% he has 41% of the team red zone targets. That's number 1 in the NFL. He has 51% of the team end zone targets, which is number 2 in the NFL.
Yeah.
And he's tied with CeeDee Lamb for the base, just 22 end zone targets overall. So, I mean, I already wanted to play Calvin Ridley. If the field wants to just jam in Christian Kirk because he's Stoneman, I'm happy to just keep playing Calvin Ridley.
That was beautiful. We couldn't have set that up any better, man. Let's talk about the Rams real quick because I think it's at least interesting. I mean, we have 2 Gary Kubiak descendants or prodigies or whatever you want to call it of the Kubiak coaching tree teeing off against each other here. That does not change. So there's still potential upside just knowing that. We know that Matthew Stafford's going to be out. We know that Cooper Kupp is going to be out. We know that Tyler Higbee is going to be out. We know that Puka Nacua is going to play. Knowing that Sean McVay does help his players get records and stuff, and knowing that Puka Nacua needs only 29 receiving yards to break the rookie receiving record, I think it's highly likely he does that. But I think it's also highly likely that he comes off the field after that. So
immediately.
Yeah. So it's like, who else, bruh? Like, who else is going to be on the field for the Rams? Does Demarcus Robinson play the whole game? Do you think as a veteran they would do that to him? How are you viewing this Rams team?
I would say probably not, just based on how he's been the core part of that. We know it's a core 11 personnel offense, like it always
Yeah.
has been. So like, and he's completely left Tutu Atwell. So I think you probably see more Atwell, more Skoranek, and who's the other dude? Trammell, Austin Trammell, or
Yeah.
like, I think we see a lot of him too. Davis Allen, probably see a lot of him. I mean, the other side's the same way. We'll probably see a lot of Chris Conley, Willie Snead, Ronnie Bell, Charlie Warner. Talk about again. That's a preseason game. That game is 100% a preseason game. I mean, it's just a wide range of outcomes. It could absolutely hit. Like we know that they're like both schematically, like Sam Darnold and Carson Wentz are guys that have played, they have experience. They could have a relative upside at their cost too. But I mean, it's just so hard. The game is such a wide range of outcomes.
Yep. Is that said?
And does anyone have a ceiling in that game? I guess is what I'm asking you. Can you sell me on anyone having like a ceiling?
My only bet that I would potentially make there is DeMarcus Robinson. And the thinking that is because so we have to separate the fact that in the preseason, these rosters are allowed to have 90 players.
Yes.
In the regular season, this is a 53-man roster, and you only get 2 call-ups. So you have to be very smart about who is sitting, about how much you're going to be playing players. And if you think about 22 primary people on the field at any given time, like you're starting to get pretty thin pretty quickly at certain position, particularly like most teams are only carrying 3 active running backs. Most teams are only carrying 3 active tight ends. Most teams are only carrying 5 or 6 wide receivers. So if we're talking about, we know for a fact that Cooper Kupp is out. We know it's highly likely that Puka Nacua is going to play a couple series, get his 30 yards, and then call it a day.
And eats one of those active spots.
And eats up one of their active spots. That's the key. So I think it's at least within the range of outcomes here that DeMarcus Robinson is forced to play most of the offensive snaps. It is a very fine line. And I think we need to at least have this discussion. We need to have this in the back of our minds, because the only real additional information we're going to get is who are those 2 call-ups on Saturday. If the Rams call up like a running back and a wide receiver, okay, well, it's probably DeMarcus Robinson isn't going to be playing a whole heck of a lot. If this team has to call up like a safety and a running back, I think it's a lot more likely that a guy like DeMarcus Robinson is going to just have to go play an NFL football game as a potential like demi preseason game. But I wanted to have that discussion, and I thought the Rams were probably the best place to do it, is because Puka Nacua is going to eat up one of those active roster spots. And I think it's highly unlikely that they're going to have Puka, who is much more important to this offense than a guy like DeMarcus Robinson. It's at least interesting. So if we see on Saturday that like they call up a linebacker and a safety, it's like, okay, well, I might throw DeMarcus Robinson in some of these. We know he has the upside. He's 4,500. I would much rather take a swing and miss on a guy like DeMarcus Robinson in that spot than some of these other like Cedric Tillman guys that you've mentioned before. So I thought that was interesting, worth having the discussion. I wanted to hear your take on it before I kind of gave mine. And I think it's the same kind of thought process as like Dallas or Detroit on this slate, is like, we don't know what we don't know, but we can kind of leverage a little bit of this ownership to place ourselves in the best position to really make a difference if the gamble that we're making is right. So just worth it to have that discussion. Denver, Las Vegas, anything to talk about there?
Not really. I mean, we'll see Zamir White be really popular.
Yeah.
He'll be popular again. And
for okay reason, I suppose.
Yeah, but again, we only have one more week to spend with this 2023 Denver Broncos run defense.
Yeah. The last time the Dallas Cowboys played the Washington Commanders, we see Brandon Cooks have one of his better games of the season. Any going back to the well there, or any interest in Jake Ferguson for his red zone role there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with either for like touchdown hunting. I think with both players, that's largely what you're doing. It is interesting. The one area where the Commanders have actually been good is slowing down tight ends. Like even on a per target basis, it's not just like because like part of it's like, all right, well, they're good against tight ends because they just give up the bag to wide receivers and running backs. But actually, on an efficiency basis, they have been actually really good against tight ends. Also, they don't face a lot of targets tight ends because they again just get crushed by the other players. But they have been good against tight ends. So he's largely touchdown hunting. Brandon Cooks, we know he's kind of like Dallas Gabe Davis, right? Like, I mean, he's a better player. He's a better real football player than Gabe Davis, but you know what I mean. Tony Pollard, I think, becomes interesting if they're like, right, like if there is a game that they're going to like run the football a lot too, it could be this one. We've seen them consistently give up production to running backs. Like I said, even though Christian McCaffrey didn't have like that uber like slate breaking game, they still gave up 200 total yards and a touchdown to San Francisco running backs last week.
Yeah.
So like obviously
and he was hurt.
He who must not be named, I think, is definitely got to be on the board. Believe it or not, he's still going for 1,000 rushing yards. I know people probably don't believe that that's a thing, and
I mean, not yet. Don't count your chickens yet, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. So, but I think he's got to be at least in conversation too. If you're, with these Cowboys, I also think that the fact that the Cowboys went to Washington last year in the same exact spot and got absolutely dusted and played a terrible shit game, is probably something they've been just railroaded on the entire week. Like, absolutely been like, I'm sure Mike McCarthy and those guys have literally been letting them know, like, we were in this spot last year. We completely went to Washington. We did not show up. Sam Howell's first career start. I think they lost 26-6 in that game.
Yeah.
So I think that they're hearing that all week. I think they come out and they're going to want to handle business. Cowboys are more interesting, though, because it just depends on who gets the touchdowns, right? Like, where do they get spread out? And like I said, if you go back to that Thanksgiving game, they were dispersed. And that's all you need for them to not be concentrated for like CeeDee Lamb at his cost to not get there. Mm-hmm. Now, he's definitely not an easy objective fade. I'll have some Dak stacks too, for sure. I'll have some onslaughts this game. But like I said, like when you look at like other wide receivers, like when I see where Justin Jefferson is going to be owned versus, CeeDee Lamb, like I'm definitely more interested in that. You brought up Chase. There's guys like Mike Evans, DK Metcalf, Amon-Ra, if he ends up not being popular. And then if you're playing on FanDuel, Tyreek Hill is on the main slate. Like, so, and he's cheaper than CeeDee Lamb this week for the first time this year. So, yeah. I mean, they included that game on the main slate. So, like, Tyreek Hill at lower ownership, I'm more interested in that as well because I just need the touchdowns to not go completely through CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, and I talk about a game that, of course, the NFL flexed it to nationally televised. Why wouldn't they? Talk about a game that means a whole heck of a lot. If you are playing on FanDuel, I think you have to have interest in that game. Do you want to talk about that game at all before we get out of here?
Yeah, we can touch on it. I will say, I think people are low-key underestimating the fact that the Dolphins could maybe let their foot off the gas at some point. So I say that, I know, so the Dolphins, I believe, are going to play this game to win. They objectively want to be the number 2 seed, and they want that play at home next week. But also, they just lost Bradley Chubb in a spot where he probably shouldn't have been on the field, and they are just nuked everywhere. They have injuries all over the board. We don't know if Mostert's going to play. They're basically operating with 40% of their offensive line. We don't know if Robert Hunt's going to play. The defensive line now has lost their 2 best pass rushers in a span of 5 weeks. They aren't going to have Xavier Howard. So, like, this is a spot to where if, like, they're down early, I could definitely see this team being proactive and kind of letting their foot off the gas and trying to get some of these games. Because they're in the playoffs already. Like, they're not out. They know they're in. So, like, they do have, if like, the Bills go up 21-0 early, like they did in Buffalo early, maybe we see some of these Dolphins come off the field at some point. But definitely from an objective top-down lens, like, that's like one probability outcome. But they're going to play this game. So you have to be in to, like, Devin Achane is the guy that obviously stands out the most, right? Anytime Devin Achane's gotten any type of tangible workload while he's been in the NFL, he's absolutely popped for fantasy football.
Yeah.
So if Raheem Mostert's going to get one more week, you got to be interested in Achane on FanDuel. He's 8,200 there, completely palatable. You can get him in lineups easy. I think from a tournament perspective, it becomes very interesting. And no, I say this as someone who built Kansas City Chiefs stacks last week and got dragged again into the earth. But there is a path for the ghost of Stephon Diggs to potentially do something in this game. Obviously, we talked about Xavier Howard. Anytime Eli Apple, the past 3 years of football, has had to step on in a uniform on the football field, he has gotten absolutely just flooded.
Yeah.
He immediately came on the field last week and gave a 75-yard touchdown. When these teams played in week 4, the Dolphins didn't have Jalen Ramsey, but Stephon Diggs put Kader Kohu in the spin cycle like 3 times that game. Absolutely just roughed him up. So what does Vic Fangio even do? Do they have Ramsey try to shadow Diggs? I'm curious to see how Vic Fangio calibrates the loss of Bradley Chubb, now trying to combat this team that has really one clear pass catcher in Stephon Diggs that stands out. Because if you look at Josh Allen's past 7 games, it literally lines up with Stephon Diggs' last 7 games.
Yeah.
Josh Allen has not been a good passer. Only Bryce Young has completed fewer % of his passes over the past 7 games than Josh Allen has.
Ooh.
And you just went through that Bryce Young box score. But Josh Allen keeps getting their fantasy football because the dude rushes for a touchdown every game. He's literally rushed for 2 touchdowns, and I think 3 weeks in a row.
Strong like bull.
But yeah, I mean, so I'm very curious to see how Vic Fangio calibrates the loss of Bradley Chubb, being down these pass rushers, being down Xavier Howard. But I think people are underestimating the potential path to where the Dolphins maybe don't go full throttle at a certain point in this game if the game script gets there.
That kind of brings up an interesting point too. We'll end it with this. There's 2 players that have been known to be very vocal. They're both wide receivers that have been known to be very vocal on the sideline after the games. Those are AJ Brown and Stephon Diggs. Both of them are coming off of a week where they were very vocal, and typically what we've seen their coaching staff do after these guys have been vocal is give them a shit ton of targets to kind of keep the peace a little bit. Some people say diva, some people say whatever, but that's kind of the situation that we're coming into this week with Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown. So some very interesting dynamics with that, at least, because we know that these matchups are good on paper for each of those guys. And I don't see a ton of expected ownership on AJ Brown or Stephon Diggs on FanDuel. So anything to add to that?
No, like I said, I have Eagles placeholders. I definitely want to play in large fields and then just try to get more information as we gathered it. Right now, we've gotten absolutely nothing, no information out of Nick Sirianni. So right now, I'm if I have to go all the way into the 4 p.m. slate and just kind of go blind, so be it. But I definitely will have kind of some stacks around that game. Well, just through Hurts and AJ Brown. I think the other pieces I don't care about, but just those 2.
And let's talk about the game theory aspect of saying hey, I have Philadelphia Shells on the main slate. Why is that more beneficial to us than saying I'll just play those guys in the afternoon slate?
Well, I mean, so definitely, so it just goes by what you had around them. So you talked about the split. So let's say I have Hurts, Brown stacks, and maybe they're mixed in with I'm trying to think of Calvin Ridley, who we talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
A Calvin Ridley or a Mike Evans. We talked about Rashad White. I'm trying to think of some of these early slate guys that we were that
Justin
maybe
Jefferson
aren't as popular. Well, I was thinking more or less the guys that we're looking for the one to pop off that maybe aren't as popular. You brought up Saints Falcons, any of those pieces.
Okay.
And say I have them in a shell with my quarterback and wide receiver stack hasn't played, but all those guys get there, right? I have that run out. That allows you either the potential to kind of push the gas pedal or kind of go to something that's going to be more popular because you're lower owned guys that already hit, right? And you already have an advantage on those gamers that are coming in with the heavier ownership on, say, a Dak Prescott or a Geno Smith, Kyler Murray versus that. So it just gives you kind of that flexibility to kind of decide what you want to do and kind of puts you in that sometimes a quandary. Sometimes you say all right, well, I'm going to play it safe. And then you're like, shit, man, just 2 AJ Brown touchdowns happened.
Yeah.
I wish I would have stuck
3, 4. Yeah, exactly.
But it gives you the flexibility, and it gives you flexibility, like I said, where you don't have to do that for every lineup. You can do something where you hedge. You can do a half and half, come off of half your lineups and go to Kyler, James Conner, or a DK Metcalf, Geno, or something like that. But that's kind of how I always play those situations. I like to play my late PM guys that maybe are even more risky with the early guys, because I care about my early cards getting revealed. The Calvin Ridleys, the Mike Evans, right? Those are the guys I care about at 1 o'clock.
Yeah,
because they're going to reveal how I handle 4 o'clock.
And if you say, I'm only going to play like AJ Brown or Eagles in the afternoon slate, you're basically giving up the edge of the uncertainty factor. Everyone's going to have the information. Yes, you're going to have you're going to have lower ownership on those guys because the news is going to come late regardless. So like there's going to be less people that leave open the flexibility to flex to those guys in the afternoon slate, but that's going to be even lessened on the main slate. So from a like game theory perspective, it's more beneficial to take on that uncertainty on the main slate where the entire field is working with a like same set of information, and now you have the added benefit of having that flexibility late to play around with the Eagles guys, to come off or to stay on them. If we don't get any information about the Eagles, that would be optimal. It feels most uncomfortable, but that would be optimal for us to play Eagles guys on the main slate, because now you're going to have such low ownership on these guys and they carry immense ceiling in this spot. So wanted to flush that out real quick as our departing 2023 now into 2024 season, man. Holy smokes, dude. We are here. Elf Bean, do you have any seasonal parting shots for us, man?
No, it was a good year, man. I had a nice profitable season. Obviously, you come on strong in the November, December months. Hopefully, we can close down with one good one. I know some people don't like to play this slate, but as someone that only plays NFL, I'm gonna be still involved, firing we can. It's the last full slate, man. I want to enjoy it. It's the last time where I'm gonna have multiple TVs set up with my son, and we're trying to watch each little quadrant of the TVs, trying to figure out, did this guy catch an 18-yard pass that matters to me versus did not. So I'm excited. It's our final, Sunday. It's like you said, it's bittersweet. Like I said, it's bittersweet that this show was successful and it's coming to an end, but hopefully we get to kind of run it back and do something again in the future.
100%, man. Absolute pleasure working alongside you every week. And if you're seeing us for the first time, I am Hilow. He is Rich. You can find me at oneweekseason.com. You can find him at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Is that correct?
Yep, you got it.
I don't want to butcher it, dude. With that, pleasure. Thank you for joining us for the 2023 season, and we hope to see you again next year. Peace.
1 week season.